Those of you who have been following my channel for some time now may remember I once said this. Oh yeah, I almost forgot about that Wonka film coming next year. All I can say is, please don't screw this up. And also this. 2023, meanwhile, is already proving itself to be quite intriguing, with lots to be excited for and lots to be concerned about. Well, here we are, people. That Wonka prequel I was referring to there has semi-recently-ish come out. And here I am to share my thoughts on it. Now, I think it's been very well established by this point that I am a huge Willy Wonka fan. I adore both the 2005 and the 1971 adaptation films of the original Charlie and the Chocolate Factory book by Roald Dahl. I can quote both films word for word. I've listened to their soundtracks endlessly. I've enjoyed so many YouTube poops and memes and different takes surrounding both of them. And the fact that I had gone from a young child who was once afraid of Willy Wonka in general, straight up petrified of it, to an absolute mega fan aware of obscure franchise trivia like how one of the naughty kids cut from the book was named Herpes, no joke, is pretty dang insane to me. I think it goes without saying that this chocolate-coated franchise has meant a lot to me and millions of others. Seeing how this candy maker and his factory have impacted pop culture and the general public is something I find great pleasure in.
I'll ask you one more time. Are you sure you didn't eat anything in my factory?
No.
Good morning, Michael.
Oh, no, 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 no! I am not Michael. I am Willy Wonka!
Poor Pomni. How about poor us? We're one tanker away from being Augustus Gloop.
That being said, when I had caught wind of the announcement that a prequel origin movie to the 1971 Gene Wilder tale was in the works, with Timothée Chalamet as the titular Wonka, I was very skeptical of the idea and concerned about the turnout, as was the rest of the internet seemingly. I mean, the whole concept just sounded incredibly corporate and modern Hollywood-esque, like it was just waiting to crash and burn. For all I knew, it could just end up being another soulless, lifeless cash-in like the Disney live-action remakes. We've seen this exact kind of situation before with the forgettable flick known as Solo: A Star Wars Story, and as Gene Wilder himself kinda put it, part of the magic of Wonka is the mystery surrounding him. And now it was just regarding the Wonka flashbacks of the 2005 film, let alone an entire movie about his beginnings. So not only does this seem unnecessary, but also kind of redundant even. I will admit my hopes and curiosity were raised quite a bit upon hearing it was coming from the director and crew behind the Paddington duology, and the producer of Harry Potter, although just because there's a talented team behind it doesn't immediately guarantee the quality of the final product. Just look at, I don't know, 65 from last year. Adam Driver, Danny Elfman, writers of A Quiet Place, Sam Raimi. At this point, I wasn't even sure if I should even bother to drag my family along with me to see it, instead going in alone out of obligation simply because it's connected to something I hold dearly. I had next to no expectations for it.
Number what now?
Allow me to refresh your memory.
Oh, I don't think I want to hear that.
Turn it off.
I've started dancing now.
Well, that's that.
However, I then started to read headlines that, despite all the odds, critics were actually liking the film? What? It really took me off guard and genuinely surprised me. And from there, I went into it a lot more optimistically curious than before. I was buying up those gummies from Walmart like crazy, literally trying to eat up the hype while I still could.
Pretty sure I've gained about 150 pounds in the last 2 weeks.
Which, by the way, why couldn't I find any chocolate bars that are made to promote this movie? That's such an obvious item to sell to market your movie. Step up your game, marketers. Finally, the day to see it came, and when my family and I went to the theater and went up to the concession stand, the lady serving us told us she had a friend who saw it 4 times and loved it. And once the movie started, I could see why. I started getting sentimental from the familiar musical cues in the opening credits alone, realizing that this was my first time experiencing a Wonka film in theaters, remembering that big theatrical events for this franchise don't exactly happen every few years. I tried to avoid getting nostalgia baited by it, but as soon as Timmy Boy's singing kicked into high gear, I knew I was in for a fun ride. And man was I right, as all my worries washed away just like that. Scrub, scrub. So despite all adversity, despite nearly everything going against it from day uno, this movie somehow actually turned out to be a delight. And here are my thoughts on it. Wonka follows the young titular Willy Wonka before he runs a factory, before Charlie Bucket, before all of it, where he tries his best to follow his dreams and honor his deceased mother by selling his incredible chocolate at the Gallery Gourmet, but in the process he gets manipulated into doing laundry duty by some horrid hotel owners, and gets continually shoved down by the corrupt chocolate cartel, so it's up to him and his newfound friends to finally put an end to the villain's schemes and bring Wonka's idea of a chocolate shop to reality. So as you could probably tell, most of the lore and narrative entirely here aren't based on any existing Roald Dahl story, aside from a few plot elements and of course several of its characters. But besides that, it's completely made up fresh and new. And because of that, and maybe due to recency, I don't find this movie to be as impactful or memorable as previous Wonka films, but I don't want that to cloud my judgment of it. Now, let me just say this, it is impossible to watch this film without having a gigantic dumb grin on your face. Wonka has this charming, lighthearted storybook wonder throughout it that you can expect to find from something like Mary Poppins or, unsurprisingly, Paddington. It's in a world of its own, and just lets you enjoy the adventure. The moments of triumph and unadulterated happiness here feel so authentic, and it just makes it all the more soul-crushing when reality snapbacks or when someone briefly succeeds in bringing Wonka down. It's not all sunshine and rainbows here. It occasionally has quite a bit of that darker edge that Roald Dahl stories are pretty well known for. Now, your first question for this movie is probably, did they do the world-famous Willy Wonka justice? Well, for me personally, I wasn't at all familiar with Timothée Chalamet prior to this, and yet he won me over so quickly. I thought he was going to be one of the weakest elements of the film, but he has this delightful naivety and eccentric humbleness that makes him a great addition to the Wonka lineup.
What's happening? What's going on?
That's the hoverfly. It's broken out of its cocoon. It's flapping its wings like Billy-O.
He treats everything like he's performing a magic act, which definitely feels in character of him.
Did you always want to make chocolate?
No. Back when I was your age, I wanted to be a magician.
Speaking of which, how well does Timmy do as a young Gene Wilder Wonka? Well, again, I'd say he still did a really good job. He moves like Gene Wilder, he looks like a young Wonka, he even talks the way I can imagine a young Gene Wilder Wonka would talk. And for those of you saying he's too happy or up in the clouds to be the Wonka we know, need I remind you that this is a younger version of Wonka, one who has not yet dealt with the hardships of competitors or spies or the stresses of running a factory, not to mention he hasn't gotten that psycho side of his personality yet from being cooped up for years with nothing but Oompa Loompas. People do change over time, and it manages to keep the air of mystery around Wonka still a mystery. And overall, I enjoy Chalamet's take more for what it is, rather than constantly needing to compare it to those that came before him. Something I think that this movie was very clever with is portraying Wonka as a poor person, much like how Charlie Bucket was. I really like that symbolism. It further emphasizes why Charlie was the perfect person to become Wonka's heir to the factory. His relationship with his deceased mother is genuinely heartwarming, especially by the end. I also love his dynamic with the scrubber crew and the orphan Noodle, with how she's more experienced with the real world than Wonka is. Honestly, just about everyone in this movie is a scene stealer, especially the villains. Scrubbit and Bleacher are so dastardly and legitimately funny. I love Keegan-Michael Key as the chief of police with all his reactions to the odd scenarios surrounding him.
Nothing to see here. Just a small group of people defying the laws of gravity.
And I'll be honest, it was pretty dang cool getting to finally see all three of the original chocolate competitors in full action here. Also, I've heard a few people saying that Slugworth being African American in this movie is a contradiction with the original, but like, do you remember what happened in the original? That wasn't even Slugworth, that was just an impersonator. And how could I forget to mention Hugh Grant as the Oompa Loompa Lofty?
Funny little man. How dare you? I will have you know that I am a perfectly respectable size for an Oompa Loompa.
His snarky remarks make him one of my favorite characters in the whole film.
If I'm gonna share my chocolate with the world, I'm gonna need more than a shop.
I'm sure you will.
I'm gonna need a factory.
Good luck with that.
Though it's a bit hard to look at the film's posters or rewatch his scenes knowing how Hugh Grant felt during filming them.
Huh. Oh, you did it again. Tell me what it is or I shall poke you quite viciously with a cocktail stick.
Every actor in this, from Mr. Bean to the steam shovel, 200 points to anybody who understands that joke, absolutely knocked it out of the park here. Great casting choices. Did I ever mention that this movie is also a musical just like the original? So how well did it do on that front? Well, the more that time has gone on, the more I've struggled to get these tunes out of my head. That pretty much says it all, doesn't it? There's not a single song in this movie that I would call painful to listen to. Each one has such a fun rhythm and infectious energy to it, coupled with their oftentimes exuberant visuals. Some I find so addictively catchy and sweet that they're gonna give me type 2 diabetes from listening to them over and over again. A Hatful of Dreams is a real shoe tapper. I cannot get Never Had Chocolate Like This out of my bloody head. A World of Your Own beautifully displays Wonka's dream being realized. And the recreation of pure imagination at the end, surprisingly, was a nice, mouth-watering cherry on top of this fudge sundae. The filmmakers stepped up to the plate and made some wonderful original pieces. The general score as well fits each scene very well. How again was this movie not nominated for any Oscars, all while Indy 5 gets nominated for Best Original Score? Sod off. Something you can very easily notice about this film, especially with the choreography, is that the songs all have the same vibe as a Broadway musical, and I adore that. Heck, I would pay good money to see this story get adapted into a stage play. No, that doesn't count. Point is, the music and direction here is very sound. It's worth noting that this movie doesn't always take itself 100% seriously. We get various crazy plot beats here, like, in order to temporarily escape his washing duties, Wonka builds a dog-powered machine to do his work for him.
With Willy Wonka's wild and wonderful wishy-washy Wonka Walker, please don't make me say that again, Tiddles gets to run, and I can have fun.
Wonka needs some more milk for his chocolate, so he and Noodle break into a zoo and get it from a giraffe. The villains try killing our heroes by shipping them off in a boat laced with dynamite, or even drowning them in a giant vault full of melted chocolate, underground beneath a cathedral guarded by Mr. Bean and hundreds of chocoholic monks. Yeah, just from that alone, you can tell how fun this movie is. It embraces the wackiness, silliness, and zaniness you should expect from anything Wonka. The name Wonka is derived from wonky after all, I think. At least it sounds like it anyway. I also like this movie's sort of basic sense of humor, and that's good because the comedy here courses through the veins of the entire production. From little background gags like the floating people getting yoinked with sticks or these little figures hitting each other on the clock tower, to the surrealism of how the trading of chocolate is almost treated like drug dealing. From the over-the-top goofy nature of so many of the performances, to the brief snarky quips made by the characters.
You and your husband have been so kind to me.
Husband? Him? Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you?
It hardly fails to really make me chuckle, or at least crack a smile. And as is the case with any good Wonka production, it isn't overly dated by modern trends, can be enjoyed by anybody of any age, and makes me crave chocolate, of course. It is worth noting that Wonka sometimes does that typical prequel thing, where it references and explains things from the original that don't really need to be explained.
Good day, sir.
That's my last jar!
I said good day.
But in this case, not only is it less frequent, but it's also a lot more minor here than it is in other films, with many examples of it here somehow ending up being quite charming, or are so subtle that I didn't even catch them originally, which is exactly how that kind of thing should be handled.
That is extremely strong stuff.
Yeah, you can run cars on that.
I love the extra details throughout, like various callbacks or payoffs to earlier moments in the film, like how the no daydreaming rule is followed up by a daydreamer's welcome sign at the end. I also appreciate all the little inspirations and nods to other Roald Dahl creations. I don't really even have that many gripes with this movie, honestly. There are probably a few plot holes or inconsistencies with the original I haven't picked up on yet, aside from the shrinking down of the Oompa Loompas, which I just view as an aesthetic change to make them more like how they were in the book and the 2005 film.
I also believe that the whole Wonka not being able to read thing, and the whole explanation for Noodle's parents and stuff, just feels a little out of place and kind of clunky. Sometimes I wish the goofiness of the acting from the villains flowed a bit more naturally, and one or two of the visual effects here are not the most convincing things in the world. Admittedly, I also subconsciously struggle sometimes to really interpret that this film is within the same universe as the original, just simply down to the lack of the original cast, different direction, and most of all, the 50-plus year gap in time between releases here.
but I feel that that's kind of a given. Besides, the film ultimately works as a prequel really damn well, but still manages to stand on its own two legs without having to rely on its more popular ancestor to be good. And that's part of the beauty and charm of this film. It totally does work as a fantastical, standalone, yummy ride. I know I'm not the first one to say this, but we need more movies like Wonka from Hollywood. That's not referring to these one-word title origin stories for old characters, no, but referring to a film that's just simply enjoyable, without a huge agenda or cinematic universe attached, one that doesn't feel the need to be a cynical mockery of a classic story like The Cat in the Hat. A film that's endearing, uplifting, and just simply plain good old fun. It may not be as memorable or iconic or have as much sticking power as the other installments of this franchise, but for me at least, it manages to recapture the whimsical and odd nature of the whole concept of Willy Wonka, almost as well as the original in some places. Words cannot describe how refreshing and satisfying it is to witness a film that was doomed to be a failure turn out to be a warm, cheerful hug from an old familiar face. A film that makes me feel like a kid again and washes away all my cynicism and toxicity from the modern world around me, which was very clearly intentional from the filmmakers, and it seems to be that way for a lot of other people too. So many other folks, from critics to fellow Wonka fans, were also pleasantly surprised by this caramel-covered treat. And that makes me just so happy, especially since, and I'm getting very personal here, I've gotten really tired lately of how so many of the big releases in my favorite franchises have ended up being underwhelming, forgettable, or just plain straight up awful. God, I hate Jurassic World Dominion. So for this Willy Wonka prequel story that nobody in their right mind asked for, that I had no expectations for, to be the one that comes out on top, ended up being worth it in the end, seriously melts my heart. It is as wholesome and sweet as the chocolate that Wonka himself makes, and for that reason and more, I might even just call Wonka my favorite film of last year. It's not the objective greatest, or the one that's the most personally significant to me, of course, but it's the one that, as of now, brings me the most joy without being tainted too much by corporate greed or any controversy surrounding it. And hey, isn't it actually kinda cool knowing that I love all three Wonka films without any weak link? For many of my favorite series, that rarely happens. There's oftentimes one installment that just falls flat on its face. But not here. I love all three of these movies. Well, okay, technically I love 3 out of 4 in this case. We don't talk about that one. Now, do I believe that Gene Wilder or even Roald Dahl would have approved of this movie? Not sure, but actually, no offense to them, rest in peace to both of them, I don't really care much this time around. Like I said earlier, I'd much rather not be all worried about what somebody else may think of something or try to compare it to whatever came before, and just appreciate it for what it is. Did this film necessarily need to be made? Definitely not, I am not trying to say that. But I seriously could not be happier with the way it turned out. It is a joy of a film that I am now very grateful that we got. It is worth noting that there have been rumors about another sequel-prequel film to Wonka, which I think is totally uncalled for, along with that horror movie about the unknown from the Glasgow disaster, I guess. Oh, good lord. But regardless of whatever comes next, if anything at all, I love Wonka through and through, and I am so happy to say that I do. Thank you all for watching, and keep on living in your world of pure imagination. Bye-bye!